Now we're going to look at the English colonies in America. So for this lecture, our main idea is that the religious, economic, and political changes in England led the English to establish colonies along the eastern coast of North America. So by the end of this lecture, I hope that you're able to explain the religious and economic reasons why England became interested in America and describe the founding of Jamestown and why it succeeded. This theme here in this lecture falls under geography and history, with the headright system providing settlers with new ways to acquire more land. In 1497, the King of England sent John Cabot to find a western route to Asia. He landed in what is today Nova Scotia and explored the region southward. However, at that point, England did not attempt to colonize North America. In fact, it would be another 80 years before England colonized. Why is this? Well, England didn't have the money to colonize. Cabot had found no gold in the region that he explored, and there was no compelling reason for anyone to migrate. Spain had claimed the land with the Pope's blessing, and Spain and England, both Catholic at the time, were allied against France. For England to colonize would upset the alliance. The Reformation divided Europe. At the time of Cabot's sail to America, virtually all Western Europe was Catholic. Several changes in England led in the 1500s to renewed interest in colonization. One was the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther, who was a German monk, published an attack on the practices of the Catholic Church. He accused it of corruption. This started the Reformation. Luther was expelled from the Catholic Church, but his ideas continued to spread. Luther goes on to found the German Protestant Church, or the Lutheran Church. While the Reformation was spreading, an important development occurred in Switzerland when John Calvin suggested that neither kings nor bishops should control the church. He argued that the congregations should choose their own elders and ministers to run the church for them. Many of the first English settlers in America shared Calvin's ideas. In England, the Reformation involved a disagreement between King Henry VIII and the Pope, who refused to annul the king's marriage. Why did the Pope not want to grant a divorce? Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon, who was the aunt of the King of Spain. The Pope felt that if he granted a divorce, it might upset Spain. King Henry VIII then broke with the church and declared himself the head of the Anglican Church. He kept the Catholic doctrine, organization, and most of its rituals. Some English people wanted to keep the organization of the Catholic Church in the Anglican Church. However, others wanted to purify the Anglican Church of all Catholic elements. These people became known as Puritans. Under Queen Elizabeth I, many Puritan ideas, such as supreme authority of the Bible, gained acceptance within the Anglican Church. King James I refused to implement the changes to structure of the Anglican Church that the Puritans wanted, such as electing its own ministers and elders to control the church instead of having bishops and archbishops appointed by the monarch. This forced many Puritans to leave England for America. At the same time as the Reformation was transforming the English church, a revolution in trade and agriculture was changing English society. Economic changes in England also led to colonization. What kind of society did England have in the 1500s? They had nobles with big estates, land rented to tenant farmers. In the early 1500s, much of England's land was divided into large estates. The landowners rented the land to tenant farmers. Then the demand for wool increased dramatically, leading English landowners to convert their estates into sheep farms by enclosing the land. This enclosure movement resulted in the eviction of tenants who were left unemployed and poor. Leaving England for America was a possible economic opportunity. The English merchants needed new markets for their surplus wool. Many organized joint stock companies, pooling the money of many investors into large projects such as establishing colonies. By 1578, England renewed its interest in North America. Englishmen began to explore the Newfoundland again in hopes of finding the Northwest Passage to Asia. The hope is that this will be a new trade route to unload the surplus of wool. This new interest contributed to the growing rivalry with Spain. Here the balance of power shifts. After England emerged as the leading Protestant power and Spain the leading Catholic power, the two countries became enemies. When the Spanish tried to check or stop the spread of Protestantism in the Netherlands, which was part of the Spanish Empire, the Dutch rebelled. England came to the aid of the Dutch. Queen Elizabeth allowed privateers to attack Spanish ships. Privateers are privately owned ships licensed by the government to attack ships of other countries. To more easily attack Spanish ships in the Caribbean, England needed to establish colonies nearby in order to establish bases. Walter Raleigh obtained a charter from the Queen to explore the American coastline. His ships landed on Roanoke, an island near present-day North Carolina, and he named the land Virginia. His motto, Amore et Virtue, by love and virtue. In 1585, Raleigh sent about 100 men to settle on Roanoke. After a hard winter, the unhappy colonists returned to England. Raleigh tried again in 1587 and sent 91 men, 17 women, and 9 children to Roanoke. A month later, Roanoke's governor, John White, headed back to England for more supplies. While he was in England, a war between England and Spain erupted, and he was not able to return until 1590. When he returned, the colony was gone. No one knows what happened to the people. There were no bodies, only empty houses. The letters CRO were carved on a post, perhaps referring to the Croatan, a Native American group that lived nearby. The war with Spain ends in 1604, and English investors petition the new King of England, James I, for a charter to plant colonies in Virginia. In 1606, the King of England granted the Virginia Company a charter to establish colonies in Virginia. The 144 men sent to Virginia founded the settlement of Jamestown. The colonists' first site turns out to be too close to the sea. The land is swampy and swarming with malaria-carrying mosquitoes. Jamestown faced many problems. What kind of problems? Most colonists were townspeople. They knew nothing about living in the woods or how to make use of the abundant fish and wild game around them. They did not know how to raise livestock or cultivate crops. Upper-class gentlemen refused to do work. The governing council could not get along or make decisions. What did these problems cause? Well, they caused lawlessness, sickness, food shortages, and about 200 new settlers arrived in 1608. Only 53 were still alive by the end of the year. The leadership of John Smith and assistance from the Powhatan Confederacy, the local Native Americans helped the colony survive. The Jamestown Company offered free land to people who worked for the colony for 7 years. New settlers arrived in 1609, but there was not enough food for them. The settlers stole food from the Native Americans, who retaliated by attacking them. By 1610, only 60 settlers survived. John Rolfe, a Jamestown colonist, developed a strain of tobacco that was marketable in England. The Jamestown settlers soon began growing large quantities of tobacco for profit. To attract more settlers to Jamestown, the Virginia Company gave the colony the right to elect its own General Assembly, which included a governor, 6 councilors, and 20 representatives, 2 from each of the colonies, 10 towns. The elected representatives were called burgesses. The legislative body was called the House of Burgesses. The Virginia Company also introduced head rights. Under this system, new settlers who bought a share in the company or paid for their passage were granted 50 acres. They received more land for each family member or servant they brought to Virginia. The Native Americans near Jamestown grew alarmed at the increasing population. They attacked the settlement, killing nearly 350 settlers. King James revoked the colony's charter and declared it a royal colony. Why do you think the fort was set up with only 3 sides? Some possible answers are it's easier to protect and defend 3 sides than 4, and it also requires less space and building materials. Catholics were persecuted in England for their beliefs. Lord Baltimore, a Catholic member of Parliament, decided to found a colony in America where Catholics could practice their religion without persecution. The king granted Baltimore an area of land northeast of Virginia, which Baltimore named Maryland. Baltimore owned Maryland, making it the first proprietary colony. The proprietor or owner could govern the colony any way he wished. He could appoint officials, coin money, impose taxes, establish courts, land grants, and create towns. Although Maryland was founded as a Catholic refuge, most of the colony's settlers were Protestant. This concludes the English Colonies lecture.